Hey, good evening, Advanced Methods. My name is Daniel Rubin, as you know. I really miss everyone, and I hope that you are well. I can't state how much or how important it is for me to be in a classroom. That's how I learn best. And so I hope everyone's weathering the storm and doing well with this online thing, and that your student teaching is going great. Um, I was not able to continue my student teaching. It was out of my hands, and I totally respect the decision. So what I'll be showing you in my slides is the project that I would have loved to implement had I continued my student teaching. The slides are going to cover what the project would have looked like, and then I'm going to show you a lesson plan that models what consequence and causality would look like in a lesson. And it kind of looks how it sounds. You know, we hear about cause and effect. We grew up with cause and effect and putting things in sequence and chronological order. There was a lot of emphasis on, us memorizing back then. And our studies from this past year have shown us that we need to find more innovative ways to teach history. And consequence and causality would allow us to give students some relevance. You start off with a consequence of maybe something that's happened today, and then you go back in history and you make that connection to make history more relevant for them. So this came about when I was talking to my guide teacher and we were brainstorming about, different methods, and we both thought it would be kind of cool to teach history backwards, so to speak. So that's what consequence and causality basically is. And the question is, will teaching a history segment in a consequence causality format improve a class's summative assessment performance? So the project would have taken over a span of two lesson segments, and I would have been able to compare metrics from both segments that would have yielded uh, telling results, I would have hoped anyways. So this is the original inquiry project, and the goal was to answer the inquiry question. Will the consequence causality method be more successful than the traditional cause and effect approach? Um, so methods to gauge class performance would have been qualitative and quantitative over the span of two lesson segments. The qualitative part would have taken place in one question in a 6 question and exit inventory. Five of them would have been, multiple choice, agree, disagree on a scale of 1 through 5. That would have been my, semi-qualitative and quantitative data, uh, and one written response, which is totally qualitative. And I'm going to go into specifics in just a second with that inventory. And secondly, the quantitative data would have been results from two summative assessments that I'm also going to show you examples of. So I'm speaking a little quickly because I've done this presentation and it came out to 20 minutes. So I'm going to try to really get through this. But the sample qualitative instrument looks like the following. So on a scale of 1 to 5, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. 1, I feel comfortable talking about what I learned in this lesson segment. Number 2, I feel like this lesson is relevant to my life. Number 3, I feel that the information I learned can be valuable to me and my community. I feel that I have had a chance to fairly demonstrate what I learned or what I have learned. And number 5, this lesson segment was informative and meaningful. So thus far, I'm gathering data that tells me, is my history lesson connecting to my students? Is this powerful knowledge, so to speak, in terms of being able to be valuable to oneself and their community, and also gauging the fairness of my assessment? Kids learn in different ways. They show what they've learned in different ways, and so would a writing assessment be fair? And I concluded that it would be, because this is an AP US history class that the lesson is intended for. And 6, please indicate one strength or weakness from this lesson segment. So I would count, or, right? Strength or weaknesses. Were there more strengths mentioned in the previous traditional cause and effect lesson, or more weaknesses in the consequence causality? Were there more strengths versus weaknesses? That's stuff that I would have been able to find out and present to you. But as I said, I was not able to carry through with that. So the sample summative assessment question could have looked like the following: discuss two major topics from the 21st century and their historical roots. So 21st century being relevant to what kids are going through today, and the historical roots of these events, which would target content that came up in the course earlier. Number two, how would you characterize the Gilded Age? In what way does the era compare or contrast to modern American life? Again, another assessment that asks AP students to do a little bit of recalling, but application as well. Recall what the Gilded Age was about, and then either compare or contrast it to a modern American life. So I would have gathered scores from those assessments. And finally, I would have had the following. Results from the assessments and questionnaires would yield metrics that give me insight to both student performance and their feelings about each lesson segment. An average score of 5 would mean that the lesson segment was flawless, which of course we know it would not be. It would be, maybe between a 3 and a 4 or a 2 and a 3. And the assessments would be graded using a rubric to gauge mastery of the learning objectives. And so the sixth question, as I said, it allows me to see what I can do better for the next lesson or see what students like most about the segment. Remember, a strength or a weakness. So I've gotten through that, and the next thing we have to look at is the lesson plan. And the lesson plan for causality and consequence, if I can just find it. Oops, taking me a little bit of time. There we go. If we go back, okay, here we are. This is the lesson plan in EdTPA inquiry format, and the title is Challenges of the 21st Century. And so as you can see, there are standards. This is a more recent standard or a later standard in the semester, which talks about, right down here is a more modern one, analyze the major social problems and domestic policy issues. And this would be my prior knowledge standard for the day, where you analyze the relationship of the rise of industrialization. And so we see I've got the Common Core stuff and the ELD stuff in there, and the inquiry question, what are the historical roots of some of this country's most pressing issues, with the assessment being formative and formal, a reflection upon Gilded Age 2.0, which would be the reading in this lesson. There's an engage, explore, explain portion. The engage portion, I would ask my students to make a list of some of the most pressing issues in their estimations, and then so they would get into groups, discuss that, make a list, we'd convene. I would then make a class list, and we would narrow down some of the bigger issues that came up that are going to be related to the content. And so if we go to the explore section, you can see here I'm targeting prior knowledge. Remember that this is a combination of today's world and making that comparison to the Gilded Age. And so in the explore section, they'd be reading an article that I have linked on the initial comment, on the initial post, excuse me. So you can see what Gilded Age 2.0 is about and the connections that are made in that article between content that most of us have probably covered if we've been teaching US history either of these semesters. So, there's all the typical, addressing misunderstandings and the differentiation, which actually gives students who are accelerated a chance to read another article, which is geared towards the environmental literacy that we were talking about. And the article's called Our Natural Resources, The Road to Academic Prosperity. And the article stipulates that they are not. So it's a telling article that kids at the high school level would be able to gain a lot of information about. But, as this presentation goes, remember, you can pause it, look at the lesson plan more closely, and see that I'm starting with what's relevant for kids in their life. And then we are going to see that consequence and see the causality of it by analyzing an article titled Gilded Age 2.0. And so lastly, I'd just like to show you the article that I found to be most helpful. Was written by Annette Atkins, and she talks about teaching U.S. history backwards, what we call consequence causality. And I'll link this up, and it just shows, her method on day 1, and how ultimately by day 12 or 13, there's going to be this take-home summative assessment that has basically pulled together what students worry about and how these issues turn into larger issues that then address actual historical content. So I hope everybody reads the article and gains some insight to it. And hopefully I've gotten you thinking about consequence and causality. So I really look forward to seeing your comments, and hopefully we reconnect soon. That virtual happy hour should be awesome, actually. So I can't wait to see you all then. And thank you.